Let's go ahead and get started. Heavenly Father, today as we open your word and we once again look at what you have for us, pray, Lord, you'll anoint your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things that you'd have me to say. And Lord, just anoint our hearts to receive. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we're starting the second lesson in Samuel. And as I mentioned last week, we're going to do this a little different than we have. I'm not going into all the detail verse by verse. We're going to take chunks and talk about the important things in those chunks.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll never get through the book. So, and we have 2 Samuel to go after this, so if we want to make sense out of it, we have to kind of move along. So that's what we're doing. That's why we have so many chapters. We're going to cover 4 chapters tonight. Alright, so we're going to start with 1 Samuel, chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines, and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Aphek. Then the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel. And when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men of the army in the field. And when the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hands of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh, that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What does the shout of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe is us, or woe to us, for such a thing has never happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines. You do not become servants of the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Conduct yourselves like men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also, the ark of God was captured, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Okay. Now, you remember that Samuel was a Nazirite until his death. So he is going to be something really special. And we see that he grew in stature and in the wisdom of God. And you remember the first time God talked to Samuel, he gave him a prophecy concerning Eli. And a prophet of God had also come earlier to Eli and specified to Eli that his 2 sons were going to die in one day. And when that would be a sign that Eli was being removed from the priesthood. Not only Eli, but his entire lineage. He was an ancestor of Aaron. The high priest was supposed to be in the house of Aaron forever. But because of the actions of Hophni and Phinehas, because of what they were doing, they were taking and profaning the offerings by taking raw meat and stealing actually from the people who brought offerings, and all the other things they were doing, including having relations with the women who ministered at the gate. There was all kinds of stuff they were doing. And God brought the judgment not just because of what they were doing, but because Eli did not do anything about it. He should have removed them from the priesthood. That was his responsibility. And so now we see where Samuel has now been recognized as a man. But he's recognized as a prophet. And so his words came from God, and they were being recognized as coming from God. And this is where we meet this tonight. So we start off with the word of Samuel came to all Israel. And really that should go with the previous chapter. It should be on the end of that previous chapter. The previous verse, in the previous chapter, the last verse says, "Then the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord," and then it should continue, "and the word of Samuel came to all Israel." So what God told Samuel, he gave it to all of Israel. This is kind of important because up until that time, as we look through the Judges, we didn't find any prophets except Deborah. She was a prophetess. And there was a prophet that came to Eli. Other than that, there were no prophets until Samuel that we know of. And what there were limited. For instance, the only prophet we know of prophesied to Eli. The prophetess, she prophesied to 2 of the tribes when they were starting to get Israel together as far as doing prophecy. She also served as a judge, and under judge she brought most all of the tribes together to go to war. So we see here for the first time that something is happening. God is starting to speak to all of the people through the prophet Samuel. Now, chapter 4 should start with, "Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines." Because it's obvious they never bothered to stop and ask Samuel whether they should go out to battle or not. Samuel was the prophet. And you remember there was no leader in Israel, so it was just all the elders of the 12 tribes. So what they would do is they'd get together and have a meeting and decide what they wanted to do. Well, in this meeting, nobody bothered to say, we should probably go talk to Samuel. He's the prophet. He was a young man, and they probably figured, well, he's still developing. We don't have to go talk to him. So they went off to battle. And by the way, it appears that probably the Philistines were actually the aggressors here, because the 2 cities they went to, which are on your map, by the way, I gave you another map tonight, in the back. You can see the circle right up, the large red circle that I put on there. That's where they went to, Aphek and Ebenezer. These were very close together, two cities. So the Philistines, they went into Aphek, and the Hebrews were in Ebenezer. And they were ready to... Both of these cities would have been in Judah. So why were the Philistines over the line in Judah? And that's what makes it appear that these were the aggressors. And so Israel went out to protect their territory. And so they went to battle, and 4,000 men of Israel were killed, and Israel was defeated. So, okay, so anyway, I'll make sure I covered everything. What the leaders of Israel decided to do was, hey, we have the Ark of the Covenant, and it's in Shiloh, and it's only a day's journey, less than a day's journey from here. So let's call for the Ark. And perhaps they were remembering Jericho, because it was the Ark that led the armies. They went out in front, and they had that Ark out there in front with the priests, and they marched around, the walls fell down. So they were probably saying, you know, if we get the ark here, if we just have the ark, we're going to have victory. So, and there was also, and this was kind of subtle, but there was a feeling in those days of belief in national deities, and we've talked about this before, where one group would have their own deity. So each group had these gods that they relied on. They were all considered lesser gods. In other words, there was a supreme god out there somewhere. Don't know where, but somewhere out there is this supreme god. And then, but he has all these other gods. And so these other gods can be as powerful or as weak as whatever they were doing, you know. So in this case, you had the Philistines. They had a god, primary god, named Dagon. And the Amalekites, they had another god. And somebody over here had another god. And so these national gods, how it worked is if God be is your God, and we go to battle and I defeat you, then I take your God, and his power goes to my God. So my God has all of its power plus all the power that he gets from your God because I defeated you and took your God.
Okay.
Strange concepts, but this is what they believed. And you remember, most of these gods were connected with something. There was a god of fertility. There was the god of rain. There was the god of wind, you know, whatever. And so if you had a god of fertility and you went out and got the god of rain, now look how much power you have. You have power over fertility, which would be your crops and all of that. Plus you have power over rain, so you can keep the rain coming. And so this was their mindset. And so when they said, let's bring the Ark of the Covenant in, they were thinking along the lines of nationalistic gods. If we bring this God in, he's going to help us defeat the Philistines. And in the process, we'll get their God. And this is not something that's easily defined. You have to look at several places to come up with that. Thankfully, I've got a lot of commentaries that do that for me, so I don't have to spend a week going through all of that. But anyway, that's where we came. That's where we come to. Now they knew the power of the God because he had delivered Israel from Egypt. They knew how much power was there. What they failed to realize, and what makes this their thoughts along the lines of national gods, is that the ark was God. It's like the idol. The idol is God. And so we worship the idol. And that's what Israel had fallen into. If we just bring the ark, God, into our midst, they didn't catch. They could have left the ark there.
Okay.
The ark wasn't the power. The power was in the God of the ark. And it's interesting, they even mentioned that the ark, you know, that God inhabits between the seraphims. That's not in the ark, that's on the ark.
Right, yeah.
But, you know, it didn't register. So they brought the ark. And they went to battle. Oh boy. It's what's interesting here, and I'm going to digress just a minute, is when they brought the ark in, Israel shouted for joy. They made so much noise that it shook the... I mean, it was like Lynch running down the field at CenturyLink, causing the thing to register an earthquake, which happened. That's kind of funny. But they shouted so loud and they were so excited that the Philistines, when they understood that the ark was there, they became frightened. they understood what the ark had done, in their thinking, what the ark had done in delivering the children of Israel out of Egypt. And what the ark had done in causing the walls of Babylon to fall. It wasn't the God of the ark, it was the ark. And notice how they referred to it. Very interesting. They understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, so the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for such a thing has never happened before. We've never had Israel had the ark with them. In verse 8, woe to us, who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? Plural. Why did they think they were mighty gods? Because Israel had defeated Egypt. Remember when they crossed the Red Sea? The armies of Egypt were wiped out. And history tells us about that time Egypt took a nosedive. Israel had come into Babylon, or not Babylon, my head's not on today too well, had come into Jericho, and of course defeated Jericho. Therefore they had the power of those gods. And as Joshua came through Canaan and defeated all of these enemies, in their thinking, he was collecting all of these gods. Okay, and that power was wrapped up in this ark. And we'll see how they treated the ark in a minute. Maybe that'll help you understand a little bit better about what I'm talking about. So they weren't thinking about the power of Jehovah to deliver. They were thinking about the power of all the gods they had collected in doing all of these victories. So they had all this power. And that's what was making them so nervous. They didn't figure they had a chance. I mean, they had all the gods of everything. They defeated all these people. But it's interesting, their leaders got them together. And basically what they said is, yeah, we may be defeated. You stand up and be a man. All of you soldiers, stand up and be a man. Get out there and fight anyway. We may not have a chance, but get out there and fight. It would be a great halftime speech for a football team that was losing. And get out there and fight, told them to get out there and do their best and defeat these enemies in spite of their gods. And that's what they did. They defeated Israel, and 30,000 soldiers were slain, along with Hophni and Phinehas. When God sets something in motion, He's going to complete it.
Yeah.
And He did. And so the ark of God was captured and taken by the Philistines. So let's read the next section, the death of Eli. Then the man of Benjamin ran from the battle line the same day and came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. Now why would his clothes be torn and dirt would be on his head? Yeah. That was their way of mourning. The battle had been lost, the ark had been stolen, rip their clothes, pour ashes on their heads. And this is what you see in this young man. He's bringing bad news. And you see this again, by the way, when the young man came to David to tell him that Saul had been slain. We see exactly the same picture. Now when he came, there was Eli sitting on a seat by the wayside, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, "What does the sound of this tumult mean?" And the man came quickly and told Eli. Eli was 98 years old. and his eyes were so dim that he could not see. Then the man said to Eli, I am he who came from the battle, and I fled today from the battle line. And he said, what happened, my son? So the messenger answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Also your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. Then it happened when he made mention of the ark of God that Eli fell off the seat backwards. Backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy, and he had judged Israel for 40 years. So here's this young man who, Israel is being defeated. They're being chased off by the Philistines, and so he runs as hard as he can back to Shiloh. And he tells the people in Shiloh that the Ark of the Covenant has been taken. It's interesting, the thing that the people and Eli and all of them were concerned about was the physical location of the ark. They didn't mind so much that 30,000 soldiers died, or that Hophni and Phinehas were dead. Eli is sitting there by the side of the road when the young man tells him, oh, my sons are gone. But when he tells him that the ark has been captured, that got his attention. Because they had put all of their trust in the ark, not in the God of the ark. It's interesting that the things of God are not always appreciated until they are gone. Yeah. So here's Eli. He's 98 years old. He's sitting on his throne by the doors of the tabernacle, which was evidently by the road. He's obtuse, not obtuse, obese, that's the right word. Evidently obese, heavy, had no exercise and probably eating regularly, 98. Blind, can't see the young man coming with the sack, with his clothes ripped and the stuff all over his head. And he hears the news that his 2 sons have died. That was the moment when the prophecy of the prophet came to pass. He fell backwards and broke his neck. Now, there are a lot of ways for men to die, but fall off and break your neck off of a stool. I mean, that's pretty, But being 98, if older people fall, they get hurt and their brains break. And this is what happened to him. Now, I want to emphasize here, though, that Eli was a man of God. His only fault was in not correcting his sons.
Right.
As a priest, he was faithful right unto death. Even on death, he's sitting there in his stool or his throne by the posts of the gate. That was his position. He was a judge, and he judged Israel for 40 years. And it was while he was on that stool, on that throne, that people would come and ask for judgment, like a judge, make decisions for us. And he was faithful right up until death. The only thing God had against him is you didn't take care of your kids.
What was the reason why he did not correct them?
What's that?
What was the reason why he didn't correct his sons?
Who knows?
I mean, he overlooked it, obviously,
Well,
because
we
he knew
talked
what
about
was
some of
going
that
on.
last week. You remember I talked about how, even today people do that. But it's my kids. But, hey, they're going to be high priests someday. Now, they can do whatever they want. They're going to be high priests. I mean, they're called into this. And so, people treat them a lot harder than they do other people. You hear that. You hear that from preachers. I've been around preachers all my life. And I hear that from preachers. You know, I was a preacher's kid. And my dad, he just really pampered me. He patted me all the time with a belt.
Yeah, but you were corrected. Sons were not corrected.
That's the point. They were not corrected. And when they continued, when he did talk to them and said, you got to stop, they ignored him and went right off to do it. And at that point, at least, he should have said, you're through. Turn in your ephods. You're out of the temple.
Yeah, but he didn't do that.
He didn't do it, you see.
Okay.
Relied on the fact that this is the way it's always been. And we're going to see this, and we saw it in the Judges, and we're going to see it in here, is because that's the way it's been. This is the custom. This is the culture that's now been developed. They didn't rely on the power of God, they relied on the power of themselves. And so they didn't need, sacrifices and stuff. It's good stuff, but we're not really that important. God is not speaking to us today. We don't have prophets that come to town and lecture us on what we're supposed to do, and so God must not care anymore, and so we just do what we want to do. But if you want the power of God, if you want God present, it's like I said yesterday, you can't fall into the trap of compromising with what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
You've got to stand up for what the Word of God says. If you don't, look what happens. Because of Eli's reluctance to discipline his two boys, look what happened. The entire house of Aaron, all the way from Aaron, Aaron, this is Aaron who was the first high priest. It comes all the way down to Eli, and actually goes past Eli to Eli's older son, who became high priest. But when he died, that was the end of the lineage of Aaron being high priest. God cut it off. And he chose somebody else. Isn't that, to me that's just hard to fathom. But God doesn't care how many people are out there. He doesn't care how long your lineage is or should be or would have been. He's only caring about obedience.
Right.
And we'll see that as we go through tonight. All right. Chapter 4, starting verse 19. Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, due to be delivered. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. About the time of her death, the woman who stood by her said to her, "Do not fear, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. Then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured, and because her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." This is, to me, a kind of a tragic part of the story. The immense severity of losing her husband, her father-in-law, and the ark all at one time threw her into labor, and she died in labor, or in giving birth to the child. And it should have been a time of joy, especially when the attendant told her, you got a son. That was a time of rejoicing in that day. That meant that she was, exalted. She had a son. I don't know whether this was her first son. I don't know if she had other children. It may have been her first child. Maybe that's why she died. I don't know. But her first son, and she names him Ichabod, meaning he has departed. What departed? The ark. Again, it was the ark. Not Jehovah, not God, but the ark. Everything was centered around the ark. She named her son Ichabod because the glory had left, and she could not be comforted. All right, let's go to chapter 5, starting with verse 1. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod, by the way, your last page on your thing is a picture of Dagon. When the people of Ashdod arose early in the morning, there was Dagon, fallen on its face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set it in its place again. And when they arose early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. The head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were broken off on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso was left of it. But the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and he ravished them and struck them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how it was, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh towards us, and Dagon our God." Therefore they sent and gathered to themselves all the lords of the Philistines, and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" And they answered, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be carried away to Gath." So they carried the ark of the God of Israel away. So it was, after they had carried it away, that the hand of the Lord was against the city with very great destruction. And he struck the men of the city, both small and great, and tumors broke out on them. Therefore they sent the ark of the God to Ekron. So it was, as the ark of the God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people." So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go back to its own place, so that it does not kill us and our people." For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there, and the men who did not die were stricken with the tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, now they're seeing the power of the God of the ark. It's interesting, when you see what was happening here, what they did, they took the ark and they took it into the temple of Dagon. Now, the city of Ashdod was one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. And that city's god, primary god, was Dagon, or the fish god. Now, Ashdod was a commercial fishing center. And today it's the 6th largest city in Israel. And it is their largest seaport on the Mediterranean Sea is at Ashdod. So it was a fishing community. It was actually a little island just right off of the mainland is where the city was, and they had a causeway that went out to it. But they put the ark in there so that Dagon could have the power of the ark, as well as it was a trophy. You know, look what we have defeated the God of the Hebrews. And so they got up early the next morning. Now, there's a lot of thought of why they got up early in the morning, but it may have been the priests that went in. They probably prepared the temple for visitors and prayer or whatever they did in those things. And they had some pretty horrific things that went on. They had harlots and they had all kinds of things there in the temple that were all dedicated to the worship of Dagon. And when they came in, here's Dagon. Now he's off of his pedestal and he's laying face down before the ark. Oh, there must have been an earthquake. Well, he must have just, we didn't have it hooked down good, so they put it up. And I can see him putting it up, hooking guy wires, making sure it's solid, it's not going to come down again. Next morning, he's on the ground again. Only this time his head's gone. His arms are gone. And actually, if you look at the original on that, the only part of him that remained in one piece, it says the torso, but actually it was the lower part that looks like a fish. That was the only part that was left. The rest of him
Was okay.
was scattered around. And so, you kind of think they would get the message. But what they did is they just quit using the temple. They shut the doors, and nobody went back into the temple. They decided, well, if you're going to be that way, we'll just shut you in here with it. You two can fight it out. And so they went their way. But what happened then was that men began to get these tumors. Now, actually, these were hemorrhoids. And one translation says bleeding hemorrhoids. They were so bad that they were actually dying from this happening to them, which I guess can happen if you have a bad one. So all these Philistines were getting hemorrhoids. There was cities, the cities were being destroyed. And we'll find out later, it's not mentioned here, but we'll find it out in a little bit, that evidently field mice or rats were eating all the crops and destroying all the foods. Much like, they were rats, but you remember in Egypt, there was the plague of the frogs.
Yeah.
It was like that. And I think Josephus talks about it, that there were just thousands of these mice that all of a sudden came out, field mice, and they were just eating everything. And you can imagine, you open a cupboard, here's field mice running around. You get in it, here's field mice. And you go to get in your grain, here's field mice. Well, you can imagine what kind of a mess they make. We know what kind of mess they make. They got under our RV and the underneath compartments, and I didn't think we'd ever get that cleaned out of there. Still haven't completely got it taken care of. They were everywhere. The ark remained in the temple of Dagon, while God tormented the Philistines with tumors or bleeding hemorrhoids that led to death. Now, when the men of Ashdod realized that the cause of their torment was the presence of the ark, they assembled all the leaders of the Philistine cities, and it was decided to send the ark to Gath. Now, that's real big of them, God's destroying us, so we're going to send it to another one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. We're going to send it down to Gath. Now, this seems strange, but what they were in fact doing probably was saying, it's probably just a stroke of luck. It's probably just because the ark, not because the ark is here. It just happened that while the ark was here, this disease hit and all these things happened. And so we'll send it down to Gath and it'll all be good. And once we get it out of here, we'll see if everything isn't better. So they took it down to Gath. And they get down to Gath, and what happens? Same things. City is destroyed, parts of it is becoming, and the field mice are there, and oh my goodness, here's hemorrhoids on everybody. So the men of Gath got together, and they called all the elders of the Philistines from all the cities, and they said, hey, we got to do something. Let's move it down to Ekron. They put it down to Ekron. And only before it got there, the men of Ekron were smart enough to know that's the problem. They said, you're going to kill us. What are you sending us that thing for? Put it on a boat, send it out in the Mediterranean, sink it, do something. Don't give it to us. But it was too late. By the time they got everybody together to decide what to do with it, their city was destroyed worse than the others. Everybody that wasn't destroyed in the city ended up with hemorrhoids. And the field mice were everywhere.
They're in bad shape.
They are in bad shape, yes. And not only that, by taking the ark to 3 of the 5 major cities of the Philistines, they spread the plague throughout all of Philistines' country. Whoa. You know, it's kind of humorous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes God has a sense of humor.
He
I really do,
does.
the way He does things. But it shows you that God will use all kinds of different ways in which to prove His strength. The ark was not the problem.
Right.
It was just a box.
Yeah.
It was that they were trespassing on what God had declared as holy.
Right.
Now people say, well, how come they weren't struck dead when they touched the ark?
Yeah.
Because they weren't Levites. And they were not knowledgeable on how to handle the ark. God does not judge you for something you don't know about.
Oh.
All right?
Yeah.
So, and we see this, in fact, Paul talks about this, and I think Romans, I think it's chapter 7 or 8, he talks about this. He says the Gentiles, and he basically says their salvation is not based on the law, because they never had the law. Their law, they have a law unto themselves, is the way he puts it. And they did what was right according to their law.
Yeah.
And people have asked, or said, how did all the Gentiles that weren't Jews, they all die and go to hell? No, there was a law that they were expected to follow. Conscience. That's what Paul talks about. And so God judges differently, and he pours out judgments differently depending on the situation. Now, why didn't they just send the ark back right away? Because, number one, they were reluctant to give up their trophies. Look what we did. This was their, hey, look what we did. They were reluctant to give that up. All right. Chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. Now the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place. We're going to get rid of this thing. How do we do it? So they said, if you send away the ark of God to Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him, the capital H.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then they said, what is the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats,
What?
according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors, and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods, and from your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he did mighty things among them, did they not let the people go that they might depart? Now therefore, make a new cart, take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked, and hitch the 2 cows to the cart, and take their calves home away from them. All right, this is really strange. Now we're getting into some really strange stuff. They didn't know what to do with the ark. Now me, my logic would say put it on a boat, scuttle the boat, you solve your problem, you know, that.
Get rid of it.
But they did something right. They called for their priests and their diviners. Now these were not Hebrew priests. These were priests probably in the temple of Dagon and the different gods that they had. They got them all together. And these were like the magicians of Pharaoh. Now we're not, today we don't have men that had the power and understanding that men had in those days. You remember when Moses went before Pharaoh the first time, he threw his stick down and it became a snake, and the magicians, they just laughed. They threw their sticks down and they all became snakes. Mm-hmm. So they had power. They could do things. Okay? Now it was power of Satan, but they had that kind of power. And so when they came in and they were asked, what do we do? They said, you have to make a trespass offering. Now, trespass offering was an offering that admitted that they had sinned. In Israel, they gave a trespass offering, which was an offering that says we have been sinners. We have violated, and so this is our trespass offering. It was kind of an admission, if you will, of guilt. And so they said, you send this trespass offering. And by the way, this was not just limited to Israel. That was a custom of the day. If you stole something from somebody, or you did something like that, and did something illegal, you gave a trespass offering. You sent an offering that said, I did this. And here's an offering to atone for that. And then you hope the other person accepted that and didn't come over and cut your head off. That was kind of what it was. So, what I find is very interesting here is verse 6. Because here's these diviners, and they say to the leaders, why have you hardened your heart? Why did you do that? In other words, why didn't you just send the thing back as soon as you saw the problem?
Yeah.
Why did you harden your heart? Just like Pharaoh hardened his heart in Egypt. Why didn't Pharaoh let him go? Pride. Look what we have. Yeah, we got this whole nation down here now. We rule. And by the way, at that time there were more Hebrews than there were Egyptians. Huh. So they had this pride thing going on. And these diviners say, why have you hardened your heart? Didn't even Pharaoh finally let him go when the plagues came on him? You've been plagued, let him go!
Yeah.
That's what they were saying. All right, so here's what they told him. Number one, you're to take, you're supposed to make a golden tumor for each of the 5 primary leaders of the Philistines. These were the rulers of the 5 major cities in the Philistine Confederacy. So you make a golden tumor for each of them. Then you go and you take and make golden rats. Now we don't really know what the number is. It says 5 golden rats, but is that 5 golden rats for each of the leaders, or is it just saying 5 of those for the leaders, and then also you had to make rats, golden rats, for each of the major cities? And we'll see that when we look at what was in the box that was sent along with the ark. They actually had to make a replica of a mouse or a rat out of gold. One for each of the major cities, and each for the major rulers, and for each of the cities, because they were all affected.
Yeah.
All right? So this was a pretty costly trespass offering that they were going to be sending. So you make those. Then you take 2 milk cows. Now, in nature, one thing you don't want to do is come between an animal, a mother, and its babies, especially bears, anything like that. You don't want to get between them. That's a dangerous proposition. Even milk cows, you just don't want to mess around with their calves. And another thing is, you don't hook an animal up to a cart that isn't trained to pull the cart. That's even more dangerous than trying to get on a horse that's never been broken. I mean, you can jump up on a horse, and if you're a good rider, you can probably stay on that horse because if you've ridden very much, you can feel what they're going to do. And you can do a pretty good job of staying on. Cowboys do it all the time. They make horses jump, but that you have a chance. But if you take two animals and hook them to a cart, now you have two animals that aren't used to working together. They're scared. They're not going to be on that cart as far as they're concerned, and they're both trying their best to get away from that cart, which means they're going to be running in all kinds of different directions. There's no way to knowing what they're going to do next, and they would tear everything completely apart and probably kill anybody in the area just trying to get away from the cart. I know when we had Jesus in Nazareth, we had horses we had to train. Some of them were trained already, a couple of them were already trained, but we had to train others to pull those chariots around. They're wide open, running and all of that kind of thing. It took a long time to train those. They didn't get on those carts until they were trained how to work together. And then we'd hook them up and try them. And here they said, take two milk cows. You don't usually use milk cows to pull a cart anyway. Then to make it worse, you take their calves and you put the calves back in the barn. So they took the two milk cows and they hooked them up to the cart. They put the Ark of the Covenant. They put a box that contained the gold tumors and all the golden rats on the cart next to the Ark. And they took it out to the road. And they said, now you let the cart go. And if the two milk cows head in a straight line toward the city of Kirjath Jearim, which was the closest city across the border with, I believe it's Judah or Benjamin. If they go in a straight line, then the ark was the problem. If the cows go nuts or turn around and come back or go looking for their calves, the ark was not the problem. This was like putting a fleece out before God. If the two cows, on their own, head down the road toward that city, then the ark is what brought all of our problems. If not, it wasn't the ark. This was pretty good wisdom from these guys because it solved two or three problems. There was still this discussion of whether it's the ark or whether it's just by chance that all this has come upon us. So that would solve that problem as well as getting the ark where it was going without having Israel turn around and come in after them. Okay. All right, so here we are. They hooked up the ark. Let's start reading at verse 8. Then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart. Put the articles of gold which you are returning to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side. Then send it away and let it go. And watch if it goes up the road to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh. Then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. Then the men did so. They took the two milk cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. And they set the ark of the Lord on the cart and the chest with the gold rats and the images of their tumors. Then the cows headed straight up the road to Beth Shemesh and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And they lifted their eyes and saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. Then the cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stood there. Stopped, in other words. A large stone was there. So they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the chest that was with it, in which were the articles of gold, and put them on the large stone. Then the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices the same day to the Lord. So when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. These are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned as a trespass offering to the Lord. One for Ashdod, excuse me, one for Gaza, one for Askelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. And the golden rats, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and country villages, even as far as the large stone of Abel on which they set the ark of the Lord, which stone remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. Then he struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck 50,070 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. And the men of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall it go up from us?" So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up with you." All right. There we go. Still hoarse from yesterday, I guess. So, the 2 ox, the two milk cows, went straight to Beth Shemesh into the field of Joshua, and that's where they stopped, right there. And there was this big, large stone there. Now, we don't know much about that stone, except that in the writing of 1 Samuel, the stone was still there at that point. Probably still there today if we knew what we were looking at. We might find it. All right. Skip some of this stuff here. I've already covered it. All right. So, when it gets to Beth Shemesh, the people are out in their fields reaping the harvest. Now, this is kind of interesting because this was during the time when the Philistines were oppressing Israel. But it was also a time when they seemingly were not doing their raids like they used to do. So evidently the city of Beth Shemesh had made some kind of a treaty or an alliance or something with the Philistines so they wouldn't come in and take their crops, because they were out in the fields. They weren't over by the wine press, with a little stick. They were out there harvesting their wheat. And they look, and lo and behold, here is the ark of the Lord on a cart sitting in their field. How would you have felt? Put yourself in their position. You had heard stories from the time you were a little guy about the ark of the Lord. This is where God is. This is the thing that only the high priest can really look at. Was supposed to ever go into the Holy of Holies. It was never meant to leave the Holy of Holies unless they were moving from one place to another. And here's this ark sitting in their field. pulled by 2 milk cows. I mean, the humor here has got to be, you know, this treasure of Israel on a cart being pulled by 2 cows. And next to it, a chest with some unknown thing in it. Well, the people became so excited. I mean, you can imagine. I mean, you know, they were just beside themselves. They rejoiced, and the Levites came out. And it's not in the order of the scripture here because they couldn't burn the cart unless first they'd taken the ark off, right? So the Levites came out, and they did it according to the law. The Levites were the one who came and handled the ark. They took it off of the cart, and they put it right there on the stone. They weren't taking it anywhere. They weren't going anywhere with it. They had heard what was going on with the Philistines. Word had reached them. They decided they were not going to do anything with that ark except put it on a stone. They took it off the cart. They took the box with all the gold stuff in it, and they put it on the stone. And then the people came, cut up the cart, killed the 2 cows, and they offered a sacrifice to God. This would be a sacrifice of thanksgiving, or a peace type offering. And the meat they probably ate, some of it. And then they came for the rest of the day, and people brought their offerings. They built an altar, and they sacrificed peace offerings to the Lord. And the reason they did peace offerings, that was food for the feast. And so they had this huge feast going on of Thanksgiving. They were offering peace offerings, which were burned offerings, but it wasn't completely consumed. They ate the meat. The only thing consumed were the entrails of the animal. And this was what they did. And you can imagine what was going on with this feast. You know, they were drinking wine, and they were having a big time. Everything was wonderful until we read that God struck the men of Beth Shemesh. Why would he strike them? Because somebody opened the ark and looked inside. Don't know who it was. There's all kinds of speculation how many people actually were involved. But you know, they had never. And here it is, we're handling it. I wonder what's inside. I wonder if the bowl of manna is still in there. I wonder if Moses' rod is still in the ark. Well, you know, they may have taken it out. Philistines may have got in there, got that stuff out of there. Who knows what they put in the ark? So they had all kinds of excuses. But I can see them where they took the lid off, peeked in there, and oh, it's all there. Hey, let's leave the lid off. Anybody want to see? And you can see the people lining up. They came from everywhere. You know, it wasn't just people of the city. The people from all the villages. Word spread. The ark is here. They all came. You know, they all came. And you can see them lining up and walking by and looking in the ark. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's Moses' rod.
Wow.
I mean, you can see that. Isn't that what had happened today?
Yeah.
Sure. So you can't really blame these people for wanting to know what was in the ark. And also remember, they were not following the law at this point completely. They were doing sacrifices, but the law to guide them. I mean, there was no prophet, there was no leader. They were just having a prophet starting again, and Samuel, and he was young. They had a judge that would come up every once in a while when they needed something, you know, and judge Israel. But there was no leader. They did everything which was right by their own eyes. But when it came to touching or getting into things that were dedicated to God, God did not accept an excuse. 50,070 people, men, were killed. Now some scholars say, well, if you rearrange the word, it comes out 70 out of 50,000. That God just killed 70 out of the 50,000 that came through. And it depends on how you structure the numbers. And if you know a little bit about Hebrew, which I don't, but reading those that do, the way they explain it, it makes sense. If you put the verb in front of the noun or the noun in front, it's like English. It's the kind of thing you can mess things up. However it was, we don't know. A large slaughter, so much so that the people said, we don't want anything to do with this ark. Get this thing out of here. Who can stand? Who can be in the presence of a God this powerful? And so they put in a call. Hey, Jerim, that's a city of Levites, by the way. Come down here and get this thing. It's too powerful for us. Isn't it kind of strange or even almost humorous, I guess, that how people's attitudes change depending on what God does.
Yeah.
As long as God was out in the field and it was a heyday and they were festive, that was great having God here. But as soon as God turns to judgment and says you can't do this, get him out of here.
Right.
If you're going to be that kind of a God, we don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. All right. 1 Samuel 7, verses 1 to 2. Then the men of Kirjath-Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. So it was that the ark remained in Kirjath-Jearim a long time. It was there 20 years. And all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. All right. Now, since only the Levites were supposed to, or allowed to touch the ark, the men of Kirjath-Jearim, who it was a town of Levites, so these would be Levites, they brought the ark to the house of this man. And I don't know, if I was Abinadab and they brought the ark in and I knew what it had just done to all the Philistines and I knew what it had just done to all the men of Beth. Do I want this thing in my house? I mean, you got to think about Dad here. Do I want this thing in my house? Now, he was up on a hill, and so evidently this would be like a fortified house up on a hill where they could be easily defended. And it was a place where people couldn't come up there without being noticed, And they don't know exactly where this is, but I can kind of, when we were up at Masada, they had the snake trail that went up. You could take the trail up to walk up there. It probably had that kind of a ascent to get up there. One way up, so it was easy to defend, and they could see who was coming. So they put it in Abinadab's house, and then they took his son, who was also then a Levite, and they consecrated or set him aside for the service of the ark, to take care of the ark. He wasn't there for the service of Jehovah. He wasn't there for the service of the Lord, only to take care of the ark. That probably meant that he dusted it off and kept things clean and made sure everything was shined up on it and nobody touched it, that it was protected. I don't know what all his duties were, but he carried him out for 20 years. Pretty good occupation. He's taking care of the ark. Now, why the ark was not taken back to Shiloh, to the tabernacle, we don't know. In fact, the ark will never again be in Shiloh. It'll never go back there. It was there for all those years in Shiloh. Why was it not taken back again to Shiloh? Did it have and their actions? Was it because the Philistines were active in that area? They didn't want the ark taken again, although I don't think they ever had to worry about that. They weren't going to come within 150 miles of that thing if they could help it, you know. I could have had to, because that's not that big over there, but you know what I mean. We just don't know. But they left it in the house of Abinadab. It was during the time of the ark, for 20 years, that the ark was basically forgotten. You don't see any reference to the ark. You don't see anybody worrying about the ark, thinking about the ark. It was just in Abinadab's house, sitting there for 20 years. It wasn't until David decided to take the ark and bring it to the city of, which would later to become Jerusalem. Can you imagine? And even then it didn't get there for many years. And we'll cover that as we get there. Let's move on to chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you read the word with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths from among you. Prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hands of the Philistines. So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroths, and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before the Lord. And they fasted that day, and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. Now, at this time, Samuel was in his 20s. What am I hearing?
The dog barking.
Oh, I thought somebody was in here.
No.
So he was probably in his 20s. And he delivers here. In fact, this would be a good subject for another book. If I ever get around to writing my first book, or maybe this will be my second book. How do you gain the favor of God once you've lost it? Number one, if you return to the Lord with all your hearts. Not minds, hearts. Return to your first love, passion. Secondly, put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths. Those are those things that we put before God, things that we worship instead of God. You know, there's so many things in life that we just put there, and they're more important to us than God. And then prepare your hearts for the Lord. How do you prepare your hearts for the Lord? David said, thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against you. How do you prepare yourselves from the heart, for God? It's through study. It's through the Word of God. It's through meditating. It's through putting your heart so full of the Word of God that when He comes, He feels comfortable. I'm just putting it in normal. When He comes into your heart, He feels comfortable. Why? His words are already there.
Yeah.
He has a place that's comfortable in your heart. And serve Him only. Don't just give up your gods, but don't serve other things. Serve Him only. Put Him first. And what will happen? And He will deliver you from the hands of the Philistines, from your oppressors. All right, anyway, let's move on. So Samuel, now in his 20s, he now takes over a position that has never been before and never was since. He was a priest. He was raised under Eli to be a priest. And so he was a priest. And then the voice of the God came to him, called to him in the night, and he became a prophet. So he was priest, prophet. On this occasion, he called all of the leaders of Israel, and he said, I want all of you to come to Mizpah, and I will pray for you. He became judge. The only man who was a priest, a prophet, and a judge.
Wow.
Whoa. And what I find is amazing, this 20-some-year-old young man sends out the call, and they all showed up. You remember when Gideon put out the call, well, most of them showed up, but some of them didn't bother. When Deborah put out the call, some of them showed up, some of them didn't. She was considered a prophetess. But when Samuel put out the call, they all came. And so here they are at Mizpah. He wanted to pray for them. And this was not the only time in the Bible when this has kind of event happened. Moses had done it at Rephidim and for Miriam in Numbers. So Elijah prayed at Carmel. So Ezra prayed at the evening sacrifice. So the high priest prayed for the house of Israel on the Day of Atonement. At Mizpah, they fasted and drew water, which they poured out unto the Lord. Now there's some question about what was going on here. Drawing water and pouring it out unto the Lord. I read one commentary which it shows you how you have to be careful with some commentary. But he said, well, this must have been the Feast of Tabernacles, when for 7 days Israel would have their meals in a little hut or a little shack that they built, and it was to commemorate the days in the wilderness. And then they would come in and have a feast at the temple. And part of the ceremonies at the temple was they would bring a bowl of water from the pool of Shalom into the temple, and the priest, they would have all these trumpets blowing and all the noise, and we covered it, if you remember, and then he would pour that out before the Lord along with a cup of wine. Well, that's all well and good, except that didn't come into place until the temple was built in Jerusalem. They never practiced that prior to that. So while this is a good idea, it doesn't hold water, oh, no pun there, when it's looked at history. So what they were doing was probably a ceremony that was saying, like water, we pour ourselves out before you. Okay? Just a symbol of saying, God, we draw out the water and we pour it out to you. As we are nothing but water, we pour it out because it means nothing to us. Okay? That would be kind of, perhaps, that's from this guy's thoughts. So anyway, Samuel became then the recognized leader of the whole nation, following the words and the direction of God. All right, chapter 7, verses 7 to 17. Now when the Philistines heard that the children of Israel had gathered together at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the children of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. So the children of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. And Samuel took a suckling lamb and offers it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Then Samuel cried out to the Lord of Israel, and the Lord answered him. Now as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and so confused them that they were overcome before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, and drove them back as far as below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shin, and called its name Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come any more into the land of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines in the days of Samuel. Then the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath. And Israel recovered its territory from the hands of the Philistines. Also, there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. And he judged Israel all the days of his life. He went from year to year on a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. But he always returned to Ramah, for his home was there. Then he judged Israel, and there he built an altar to the Lord. All right, a couple of interesting things. Number one, instead of doing as they had done before, which was get their armies and go out and fight, the leaders of Israel went to the prophet, who was the priest and the judge. They didn't say, "Hey, pray that God gives our men valor that they go out and fight. Pray that we get the victory." He said, "Pray to God that He will deliver us." And so Samuel, he took a suckling lamb. That was a newborn lamb. It had to be at least 8 days old, but it still had to be nursing. That's according to Leviticus 22 and 22. This was a special offering unto the Lord. And he took the lamb and he offered it as a burned offering. In other words, it was completely consumed. It wasn't put on there as a thanksgiving offering or something like a peace offering. It was put on there strictly as a burned offering before God. And this is the offering that comes up before God as a sweet savor. And that came up before God. And while he was doing that, he was praying. "God, you put me here. You told me what to do." I'm putting words in his mouth because we don't know what he prayed. Okay, but if I were there, I think I'd hear something like this. "God, I'm burning this lamb. You put me here in this position. We've got Israel here. The Philistines are out there. And Israel has turned its heart to you. Remember again Israel and do a mighty thing here." I can just see him, because that's kind of the way Samuel seemed to talk with God. So the Philistines got near to Mizpah, and they were getting ready to do battle, and all of a sudden it started thundering. Now this was not a thunderstorm. Now people say, "Well, you just had a thunderstorm." You know, these people have been around storms all over. These were coastal people. They were used to the storms that rolled in off of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, they knew what thunder and lightning and storms and all of that was. This was something entirely different. It sounded like thunder, but there was something different about it. You remember when Moses came to Mount Sinai, led the people to Mount Sinai, and they got there. And God began to speak. It was so loud, it was so terrible, it was so magnificent that the people said, "Moses, tell him to stop!"
Yeah.
Huh? When God speaks, I don't know about you, I would love to be there as an observer. I would love to hear the voice of God that way, with that much power. The Philistines didn't want to hear it though. It got them so confused, so frightened, so they were just completely, they didn't know what to do. And the children of Israel swept down out of Mizpah. And I saw one commentary, he said, well, I wonder where they got their weapons. They always traveled with an army, okay? So the army that was there swept out of there, and maybe people came out who weren't even in the army. And they picked up weapons from the Philistines, I don't know. But it says it chased them out of the land of Israel, down into their own territory, and that was the end of the unified attacks on Israel by the Philistines.
Yes.
There were still times when they would come. We know David had to fight Goliath,
Yeah.
okay? But that was Goliath from Gath, which was one of the cities. But it wasn't a huge army. It was the army of Gath that came out. Not this unified Philistine army of thousands of men. And so Samuel, he took a stone and he set up a stone. And the authors say, probably from the way this was written, he wrote the word Ebenezer on the stone. Now this was not a place of worship. This wasn't a stone they came by and built a little shrine around. This was a stone of remembrance. When you see that stone, remember Ebenezer. What happened at Ebenezer? The children of Israel were defeated by the Philistines because they had the ark and not the power of the ark. Oh, pretty powerful stuff. And by the way, this stone is very close, where they describe it as very close to where the town of Ebenezer and the battle took place. Stone of remembrance. Now the coastal cities still belong to Israel today. You know, they took some of them back in the war of 1967. I think they took out some. But today, all the coastal cities along that strip belong to Israel down to Gaza. They're all Israel's. People say, well, what right does Israel have to any of that?
That's right. Yeah.
Right here, this tells you.
That's-
It was given to Israel by God himself,
That's right.
and it doesn't matter who comes in, Philistines, Amorite, Achamoites,
That's right.
any Hittites or anybody else, or Palestinians, or Arabs, or Syrians,
Mm-hmm.
or Iranians. They belong to Israel,
That's
and
right.
God will make sure
That
they
they take
retain their
That's
cities.
right. He will.
Yeah. So this is, what we're reading here is the basis for what we see 3,000 years later. It's amazing. And people say this is not the Word of God. What's the matter with people? I mean, come on. You know, this is the Word of God. Powerful stuff. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He made a circuit on your map. I circled some of the cities that we talked about, and you'll see the circuit that he made. You'll notice he didn't get out of that territory very much. But that's where most of the people were. And so that's where he judged. And people would come from the other areas to wherever he was at also and get judgment. It's interesting he stayed in Shiloh. We, in probably our way of thinking, would have went up to Abinadab's house and say, can I build a house in your backyard and I'll stay here with the ark? Oh, and we'll bring the tabernacle up here.
Right.
Nope. God separated the ark from the tabernacle, and Samuel left it that way. Any questions?
If Israel, if all this is supposed to be Israel's, right? Then what happened to Gaza? Wasn't that Israel also? Or they just took it?
They will eventually get it back.
I mean, because if you look on the big map, right, and you know Israel's this little itty bitty thing, you know, but Gaza is like cut it
They'll get it back.
Yeah,
Say, wow,
They will get it back
figured
along
it
with half
all
of Jerusalem
belonged.
that currently belongs to the Philistines,
Yeah.
you know. that-
yeah.
And all of this territory inside of Israel, you know, you're now in the territory of the of the Palestinians, all that will revert back to Israel and they will have.
Yeah,
complete
because
control.
God gave that to them.
Well, the thing is, the king of Israel is not gonna allow them to stay.
Well, yeah.
And all he's gonna have to do is open his mouth and that'll be the end of him.
That's
So,
right,
you
yeah.
see, so, in that time, they're gonna own all of it, so.
Yeah,
I mean, I thought, well, the whole thing was theirs, you know.
It was given to him.
Yeah.
it was given to them.
Of course, the kicker there, you have to remember, the land was given to Abraham, but there was a caveat on there.
There was a what?
a caveat.
What is that?
Well, caveat mean there was a stipulation put on it.
Oh,
Everywhere where your foot rests, everywhere where you step, it's yours. So if he didn't step in Gaza, it wouldn't be his. But I think he covered all of that, didn't he?
okay, see,
He was down into, he went
I
down
learned
into.
something new.
Yeah, he
They
went
say
down-
if you don't learn something new every day, you've wasted that day. Well, I
Oh,
just
sure.
learned something, I just learned a lot new.
One thing to remember too, people have said, well, what about King Saul? What happened to Samuel when Saul became king? He still acted as judge, priest, and prophet. He was Saul's prophet, and he judged whenever he needed to, including Saul. So he kept his office, and he kept what he was doing until he died. That's it for tonight. Next
When
week,
did he,
we will
when did he
continue.
die?
Huh?
When did he die?
Well, we'll find that out. We get into the
Oh,
book.
fine.
Don't